In today's episode. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. School expelled me for mom's anger. We sued the county and caused a reform. So let's get started. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1, this story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2, this happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3, I am not a native English speaker, and professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullsh T kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems, and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this, and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards, that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective coworkers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. In it everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the 3 managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his, that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare, and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business, now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake, and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension, and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations, and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. School expelled me for mom's anger. We sued the county and caused a reform. Not sure if this fits this sub, but felt like posting my story. I have no issue with removing it if it doesn't quite meet the standard. So I have a really bad leg, I've had 13 surgeries, long story, and had just started at a new school. After the first 3 weeks, I had to go in for another procedure on my leg. Not that big a deal to me, I've been here before. Upon my return I had documentation of my restrictions, as well as special amenities that were required. The big 3 were that I needed extra time to get from class to class, must have someone to escort me, and needed unrestricted access to the elevator. All of these got me recurring problems such as constant harassment by teachers and security about my being in the halls during class time, and why was my cousin out too? He was filling the role as my escort, as I have anxiety problems, and we had the same classes. These first 2 were annoying, but easy enough to deal with. The real issue was the elevator, as I was told multiple times that for security issues I couldn't have a personal key due to it sharing the same functionality with the interior door keys. I would never have had any issues with this, as I was told there would always be someone on the same floor as my classes to open the elevator for me. This, of course, was untrue about 75% of the time. The lack of elevator access meant that I was always stuck in the halls when other students were going class to class, and was consistently late due to having to wait for someone to come by and open the door for the elevator. This also meant that I would sometimes be stuck waiting through the entire lunch period, and due to my absences couldn't afford to simply go to lunch after the fact. After about 3 weeks of this, I was tired of not getting to eat lunch. So I did one of the stupidest things I could have attempted and tried to use the stairs. For context, I was not on crutches, I was on a full-blown walker. About halfway down to the landing, I fell hard. As lunch was letting out, one of my friends found me, got someone to help pick me up, and carried me to the office. Another of my friends went to find my other cousin. The one who normally escorted me wasn't there due to being sick, so I was without escort because I couldn't bear the though of gasp a stranger escorting me, who when getting to the office managed to get me to calm down enough to give them my mother's number. Now, my mother is quite hot-tempered, but can keep a level head normally. When she heard I fell, she was there in record time. When she got there, she immediately asked what happened. I told her I didn't want to miss lunch again, so I tried to use the stairs. Big mistake, as that set off a Tsar Bomba-sized explosive. She immediately turned around and demanded for the principal and VP to get their asses in here ASAP. As soon as the principal and VP walked in, she started berating them in a fashion not suitable for most adults to hear, let alone kids. When the VP made an offhand remark about my condition, my mother was swarmed by local sheriffs that provided security for the school's entrances and office as she physically went after the VP. We were escorted out, and after looking at the file and realizing my cousin and I had the same address, they figured out that I didn't actually live there. Now, my grandmother's address was listed as she looked after me after I left school up until around 8 p.m. She also was raising my cousin after an issue between her and my aunt. They used this as grounds to expel me, and told her I can be some other school's problem now. I was then enrolled at the school near my house, and had to have yet another surgery to repair the damage that was done as a result of my fall, and redo the work of the previous procedure. I had gotten multiple statements from teachers as well as my doctors, and my parents were moving forward with a lawsuit naming the VP principal and the county school board. We were contacted by a lawyer who had won multiple cases against our school board, some of which went to the state Supreme Court, and he told us he would take our case pro bono. He was getting tired of going against the board, and though a case like this would be what it took to try and fix their shit. Fast forward 9 months, and I was walking out of court with a settlement to cover all my procedures, as well as a written confirmation that the school would be going through a complete administrative overhaul, and that the principal and VP would be let go, and have their administrative credentials revoked in our state. My new school was let know day one my medical requirements, and my need for a personal elevator key by the superintendent and the head of the State Board of Education. Long story short, school majorly F*** kept up with handling my medical requirements, resulting in a lawsuit that cost the head administrators their jobs, as well as a full-blown county-wide investigation of disability procedures. Thanks for watching.